Welcome back to Summer Money on the Sky News Business Channel. Now, Compumedics is a global leader in the design and manufacture of diagnostic technologies for sleep disorders, neurophysiology and cardiology. Founded in Australia in 1987, it now sells its products in over 50 countries. And joining me now from our Melbourne studio is its founder and CEO, Dr David Burton. Dr Burton, thanks very much for your time this evening.
Thanks for having us, James.
Look, just to start with, can you tell us a little bit about the company and what it does?
Yeah, well, Compumedics is a manufacturer and designer of computerised sleep diagnostics and neurology monitoring equipment. We export 90% to the world market, and we supply equipment basically to diagnose sleep and neurological disorders.
In terms of the markets that you operate here in Australia, I mean, have you any estimates as to their size?
Yes, look, the sleep disorders market worldwide now, in terms of the device market, is expected to be about $5 billion by 2015, and it's currently a multi-billion-dollar market in terms of the treatment and the diagnosis. We're specifically in the diagnosis market for sleep disorders, which means we make, in Australia, for example, about 70% of the sleep centres are equipped with Compumedics monitoring systems. But of course, our big opportunity is the growth markets of China, being based in the Asia Pacific, and the US market, where we only have about 30% coverage in sales, but we've got an opportunity to ramp up our sales force 2 to 3-fold. So that's where the big opportunity for our equipment is, James.
Just domestically here in Australia, how much of an issue are sleep disorders?
Well, it's interesting you say that. Sleep disorders, not many people are aware, but 1 in 5 people actually suffer a sleep disorder. And in the turn of the millennium, the biggest driver for our type of equipment and sleep disorders is the awareness of comorbidities. For example, 30% of hypertension patients also have sleep apnea. 50% congestive heart failure patients, in fact more than 50% of congestive heart failure patients have sleep apnea once again. So it's the comorbidities associated with sleep apnea and the general sleep disordered breathing which is really driving this field.
And you know, those statistics, society of 1 in 5, I mean, is that a global trend as well?
Yeah, well, those numbers are specifically taken from markets like USA and Australia, but they are quite representative across the world in terms of the awareness or prevalence of those particular disorders. But there's other disorders such as diabetes 2, and you know, a lot of the sufferers of diabetes 2 are also having sleep apnea. So as this awareness grows, particularly in the turn of this millennium, that awareness has really grown, and that's what's driving the demand for our products.
Now, from what I understand, you hold about an 80% share of the Australian market. Is there much more scope for growth here?
Well, the Australian market, we've been holding the sleep disorders market since we founded in terms of the sleep disorders equipment, the market share since we founded. But our major growth is USA and China, and they're both separate stories, of course, but USA is an enormous market, and currently we have a major headquarters and a direct sales force, but we only really cover 30% of that market, James. So our strategy at the moment is to scale our sales force up, as I said, 2 to 3 times. The sales will follow that, and that's really the major breakthrough for our company. On top of the fact, being geographically located in this region with China, that's an exciting growth story for us as well.
Now, I want to ask you about China and I suppose the Asia Pacific region a little bit later, but just focusing now on the US. Obviously, if you're hoping to increase the workforce by that sort of scale, conditions and the marketplace are good at the moment?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing that you say that, because of course with the tough US market, we're in a slightly different position. We only have 30% coverage, and we win most of the sales in America where we compete. So we can ramp up our sales force 2 to 3 times based on those facts and figures without seeing too many issues. Now, the real fact is that in these tough times, of course, it's more abundant in terms of good employees. So we've sort of got a reverse effect for us, where we've got that opportunity to access that enormous US market. And keeping in mind, USA is the #1 medical device market in the world. So it's a large market, it's established. And interestingly, with those comorbidities such as hypertension, you'll see the demand for diagnosis, which is what our equipment provides, increase with these more stressful times. So there's a couple of interesting spins on that particular US market for Compumedics in particular, James.
Well, in what is obviously a far more competitive marketplace in terms of the US, what is it then that is driving the growth, your point of difference that is allowing you to gain the market share?
Well, technology-wise, we've been investing probably 2 to 3 times that of our competitors in research and development, and we've maintained that investment through the GFC downfall and right up to this point for some 20 years. So our technology, our patents and our IP stand as very strong in terms of the competition, and that's paying off now, as I said, in terms of this unique position to scale up our sales force. Traditionally, we've been technologically focused. Now we're firmly market focused to ramp up the sales force in these times, and we need to do that also. As you'll see, and most people are aware, the US market will return and rally as it's the biggest device market, and that was established over 50 years, so it's not going to go away fast, James.
What about the European market? How does that compare?
Well, European is a similar story to the US for Compumedics. It's a large, well-established market, and once again, we have very little coverage in that market. So we can scale up our sales force, and we're doing that as we speak. We're looking for people in Germany in particular, where we have a direct base, and we've undertaken an acquisition in Germany, which is a good, solid team. So we can achieve a lot of growth out of Europe from a large base that we have little penetration at the moment, but once again, we're winning most of the sales where we compete. So that technological edge over that investment in the R&D will pay as good dividends as we expand in Europe and USA.
Now, a big announcement earlier this month, you secured a contract win in China. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, well, that's an exciting... Beike is one of the finest medical device companies in China, and as we mentioned, that was over $1 million, over €1 million actually, and it was for our ultrasonic blood flow equipment. But Compumedics has, over some more than 10 years now, has established its name as a premier supplier of neurodiagnostics, sleep monitoring, and now ultrasonic blood flow equipment. So our reputation, our name, along with the regional base in China, means that we're one of the few companies with leading products in those areas of sleep, neurology and blood flow, which will greatly benefit from the expansion of Chinese market, particularly with its focus on upgrading and building new hospitals, which will be occurring over the coming years in China, along with the rest of the growth of that market that we're starting to see.
Look, I want to ask you about the potential for the Chinese market, because obviously when you're talking about any industry here in Australia or companies looking at growth offshore, a lot of them pinpoint China as a boom sort of market in terms of growth. What is the potential for this market for you?
Well, you know, in most areas, people recognise that eventually China will be a similar size, I guess, in the market of most areas, if not exceed that of USA and Europe. That's a matter of the time, of course, because infrastructure does take time to ramp up. But for us, we're perfectly positioned in this region, as I said, and the growth is occurring. So we think that that market will eventually end up similar size to USA. Now, whether that's 5 years or 10 years, that's a debatable subject, and we have to see. But one thing for sure is, currently, very little of our business has been China, and that story's changing, and you're seeing these sort of deals, and I expect to see more of those. One of the things that's taken us 20 years is to establish our reputation as the premier supplier. We're the leading supplier of premier neurology and sleep and ultrasonic blood flow equipment in China. In that deal that we just mentioned, over €1 million, we're 60% market share, but it's from a small base. But that's important for us because it's the dynamic growth, and that's what we're tapping into, James, and I think that's what's important for the future. Have that solid Europe, USA, large market, which is immediately allowing us to scale up our sales force, but have that growth factor in the Chinese market.
So in terms of a breakdown in geographically when looking at earnings, I mean, are they on a similar level? Are the US far out ahead? I mean, what can you give us some sort of idea of the percentage breakdown?
Yeah, well, typically we do about 40-45% in our US market. Our Australian or Asia Pacific market is about 15%, and the rest of it is Middle East and Europe, and Japan, interestingly enough. And on that subject, I mean, in Japan, not many people are aware, but Compumedics is the #1 supplier of sleep diagnostic equipment. And that similar model, where we established the reference centres in the first 5 years of development, and then we became the #1 market leader with an alliance in Japan, we expect to see in China as well. So we've done this particular role before where we've established our premium reference centres, and then we've kicked into the higher growth off the back of those reference centres. So we think that's scaling up is the likely outcome for China, similar to what we achieved in Japan.
And as you say, I mean, you're working, I suppose, almost in partnership for some 10 years over in China with the Beike. How important is it having connections, links, partnerships, if you like, with local interests in countries like China?
Well, it's extremely important in China because it has a different culture, and we have to rely on a lot of our business partners to really penetrate that market. And it's a totally different format in terms of Europe and America in terms of distribution. So having spent those years learning those lessons and now having the premier distributors, we expect also this will attract some interesting alliances and potential strategic investors, because we've done those hard yards and that's not done overnight. So I think it will pay off very well, A, to be in the region, B, to be already the established reference centres and the premier supplier of sleep diagnostic and ultrasonic blood flow, and now to tap in to one of the strongest growing markets in the world, which is China. So that for Compumedics is quite unusual and unique, but ideal for our future growth.
All right, Dr. Burton, look, thanks very much for your time this evening. Do appreciate it.